Hi everybody and welcome to today's session. My name's Dan, I'm from Social Enterprise UK and I'm delighted to be here on Social Enterprise Day. So many happy returns, congratulations, whatever the correct terminology is for Social Enterprise Day, but I'm really pleased that to see on social media and through our contacts at SUK that it's something that's happening all over the world. I was on a call this morning with Kenya where they're celebrating Social Enterprise Day with a big event and a big launch. And we've had contacts from, I think, as far as Sri Lanka and Jamaica and Canada and the Philippines. So it's truly a global kind of event today and maybe yesterday if you're in New Zealand. But there's a tremendous energy as part of the movement. And I think it's really great to feel part of that and connected to that at what is particularly difficult times this year, to feel that there's others around the world sharing similar experiences and aspirations than we do. I'm also very pleased to be joined by friends and colleagues from around the world in different continents today as well to share their experience and their insight on that kind of movement and how it feels in different parts of the world. I'll say a little bit about SUK and our work and my work on the international front, but then very quickly hand over to Lana, Mariam and Viteka to tell us more about their perspective. And then near the end of the session, we can hopefully make it more interactive and have some more questions and engagement. I'm sure everyone's very used to Zoom. There's a Q&A option at the bottom of your screens and a chat. Please feel free to use those and try and make this as interactive as you can. Q&A, I guess if we've got specific questions for people, we can address those as we go, but we'll hopefully open up to a wider session at the end. Chat, maybe more for observations or links or anything else you'd like to share. And it's great to see many of you already joining us from around the UK and indeed around the world as well. Great, it's starting to work as well. There's already some messages coming in, so welcome all. Okay, so just to give a brief overview of Social Enterprise UK's work internationally, and the title of this session is around the contribution of creative and social enterprise to the challenges we face, and to say a bit more about that, focus on creative as well. I guess first of all, I must explain how our work internationally at Social Enterprise UK has grown over the years. I think, our raison d'etre and our mission is initially very focused on our members and our work here in the UK, but through interest and contacts and engagement with others around the world, it's increasingly grown over many years, and particularly also in partnership with other organisations. So Viteka from Euclid is here today. But the British Council is a very close partner who we work on many projects with around the world and have really helped us develop our global reach and share knowledge and lessons around the world. And I think that's really what we try and do, is share lessons. And I've been delighted to be able to kind of, facilitate contacts and exchanges between different countries and different continents. It's not about one country sort of having all the expertise and the answers, but I think we've had so much that we've been able to learn and share across different contexts. We do a number of different things with the British Council and others in the international field. One of the sort of 2 or 3 or 4 areas that we work on particularly, one is social enterprise mapping, or our State of Social Enterprise reports, and some of you would have seen our UK one. And we've now done similar work in around 20 plus countries around the world, on 3 or 4 different continents, always working with a local partner, always learning and coming back and feeding into our work domestically as well. And I can say a little bit more about what we found in that work and the evidence, the data and the stories that we've uncovered through that work. We also increasingly have supported policy work. Now, it may be quite general policy around sustainable development goals or even social enterprise in South Africa on social economy policy, and in Ghana, Ethiopia, Pakistan on social enterprise policy, and in Greece on very specific ideas around government funding programs as well. So quite a diverse mix again there. And I'm really pleased and encouraged that some of our evidence work and the mapping has led to the policy work. As a often grumpy skeptic, I kind of think that when politicians say they need the evidence to inform the policy, they're just getting you to spend 6 months a year wasting time gathering the evidence, and then when you come back with it, they kind of say, oh, well, thanks, we didn't really want it because we're not really interested anyway. But in actual fact, it's been fantastic for me to see in different countries the genuine engagement from policymakers where they have responded to that evidence and the work that we've provided, and have got more and more enthusiastic and passionate and converts to social enterprise. Specifically on the cultural side, about a year or two ago, the British Council decided to bring together their work on creative economy and social economy and undertook a project which they called DICE, which is Developing Inclusive and Creative Economies, in 5 countries, so in Brazil, South Africa, Egypt, Pakistan, and Indonesia, looking specifically at the contribution of social and creative enterprise. And I think we've learned a lot, particularly on the creative side. Of course, we have many members, social enterprises who work in the creative and cultural sectors, but I think we've learned a lot around the relationship between those two parts of the economy and society. The contribution of these businesses I think has been quite exciting for us to get to grips with. I find that in a lot of the research and policy work that I've done and SUK has done over the years, we tend to focus on 2 things. First of all, the size and the scale of the sector, for example, if you want to call it a sector. So how is turnover in terms of GDP, job creation, how many of these businesses there are, and that's the kind of headline figure. And then, of course, there's the sort of impact measurement, impact management industry, if you like, where this is quite complex, and I don't pretend to understand any of the methodologies for understanding the impact that a program or intervention or the work of a social enterprise has. And that can be quite granular and quite detailed and quite complicated. What I really like about this work is we've almost been between these 2 spaces. It's not just how many of these things there are or the impact of one particular project. It's the contribution that these enterprises are making to the world that we live in. So it might be about what kind of jobs they're producing. Are they paying taxes? Are they being inclusive employers? Who's running them? What kind of solutions are they, as a whole, generating to help us meet our common challenges? So it's not just how many there are and a big number, not just the detailed work of one organisation, but this kind of picture of the overall contribution that our community of social enterprises is making around the world. So with our DICE project, we've published, I think, 2 or 3 of these reports. Please have a look at the British Council website or our website for Indonesia. I think we've published, and South Africa. And Lana will tell us a bit more about some of the specific findings. But I think I'm really pleased that in every country so far, we set out with almost hypotheses on what these businesses are up to, and we found really encouraging news. And we looked at 4 specific things. The jobs they're creating. Many countries have this kind of a youth expanding population, and they need to create many jobs for young people. Whether businesses are addressing the SDGs and the common challenges we face, whether they are creating a more equal society, because actually inequality is, of course, and economic inequality is underpinning many of the SDGs that we supposedly together have agreed on to confront. And finally, the sense of sort of communities, and in many countries in the world there's a sense that maybe communities don't feel together, questions around sort of nationhood or sort of broken Britain we talk about in the UK or used to, and things around the left behind and not left behind, and whether these businesses are helping sort of bind communities together. And Lana will go into more detail on that, but just generally it's been fantastic. We didn't know what we were going to find, and to be able to see that these 3 or 4, 5 reports we've published, and 5 reports to publish, is good news in all these countries that creative and social enterprises have a significant and really inspirational contribution to make to these common challenges we face wherever we live and work. So I'll hand over to Lana, which I'm delighted to do. Lana, I'll let you introduce yourself, but thank you so much for being here with us today. And it'd be great to hear a bit more about, yes, our work that we did together in South Africa, but also kind of what's going on more widely, and the sort of state of the social enterprise or social economy with your experience and insights. So thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I kind of have I guess an interesting viewpoint on social enterprise broadly. I'm kind of from all over. I'm Croatian. I grew up in Canada, and I lived a few different places before going to South Africa about 11 years ago. So South Africa really is my core expertise now within this space, but I've worked as both a consultant as well as a social entrepreneur, and I've also been an impact investor. So I've kind of seen this ecosystem, I think, from quite a few different angles, and I'm very passionate about the space. So what I'm going to try to do is, within 10 minutes, which once I get started on this topic, I'm going to need to be trying to pull myself in. But basically, I'm going to try to take you through some of the things that I've seen in the South African, and maybe even more broadly, the African ecosystem at times, even though it's quite diverse within different countries, of course. And then I'm going to take you a little bit through the findings that we had from the DICE survey, which were fascinating. And I think right now, probably of quite a lot of use to the local ecosystem in South Africa. So let me just quickly share my screen so that we can, yes, okay. Just 1 second, here we go. Okay, so before I launch into the DICE findings, I just wanted to give a slight introduction to what this looks like in South Africa. So, I think probably a lot of you will recognize these because they're not unique to South Africa. Much like globally, South Africa has challenges with definitions around social enterprise, with the idea that not everyone who is a social entrepreneur as such would identify themselves in that way. And vice versa. A lot of people call themselves social entrepreneurs, but may not fit the definition that has been set within a given country context. And South Africa is certainly no different in that space. As you can understand, probably that makes research a little bit difficult, but we did try to adjust for that when we were doing the DICE survey. I think that in South Africa, being such an unequal society with a lot of challenges as well, there is very much always a debate around what is social. And so, that also clouds the ecosystem quite a bit because, people will say, oh, well, I'm creating jobs, so I'm a social enterprise. And of course, that becomes, it's challenging to say, and what actually do we consider social or environmental impact? Within that as well, if you're creating impact, but you yourself as an organization may have some practices which are not ideal, to what degree are you a social enterprise in that case? And that's also something that comes up quite a bit in South Africa. That being said, I think one of the biggest things that I'm particularly proud of is the social economy policy green paper came out now almost 2 years ago, so in February 2019. And that was really, I think, a big turning point for South Africa. For about 2 years before that, there was a lot of research that went into setting the social economy policy. And it was very consultative. So there was a few of us. I was actually part of the core consulting team of about 10 people who did research around different themes within the social economy and made those recommendations. And then we convened, the ILO actually convened groups of large amounts of stakeholders in order to get that kind of really, let's say, participatory sort of approach. And as a result, the draft green paper was put together. And it's looking like that's going through several changes, and hopefully the final policy will be put through sometime next year. So I was told March, so let's hope that's the case. And I think this is a really big step. A part of that is also the idea of a buy social mark, which the UK, of course, has. And looking at things like that, I think are very, very important because it's really raising the profile within the ecosystem of this potential for social enterprise and for the social economy more broadly, which is very important. There is a very vibrant ecosystem. There is a lot of support. There is a lot of funding, but here as well, there's complexity because there's something called Black economic empowerment, which of course has to do with the particular history of South Africa, which was very, racially segregated and all those things. And so the government has tried to create policies specifically for addressing that, which is really great. It means that a lot of funds move into things like enterprise development and, even CSI, social investment, but those things are oftentimes output driven and they're not necessarily impact or outcome driven. So you see funding moving into that space, but not necessarily an awareness of whether it's having the impact that it needs to have, and so on and so forth. And so a lot of people, even who call themselves impact investors, a lot of organizations, they may just be BEE investors, meaning they invest in normal companies that are Black owned, right? And again, that becomes another debate. Is that sufficient? Is that social? And of course, it's very important, especially in a context like South Africa, to make sure there is that kind of transformation. But there are also other things to kind of consider and look at. So, and I think just important to note, funding is still, even though there is a lot of funding in the space, lots of early stage gaps, lots of challenges, which we've seen for social entrepreneurs, which the DICE survey also uncovered. And lastly, just to touch on at a high level here, the COVID situation, as you might imagine, has also been quite challenging. I think for one, the economic situation is felt much more keenly in emerging market contexts. And the cash reserves are a lot less in many cases. And so what's happening as well, we've seen a lot of ecosystem players fail, including in the social and creative economies. I personally know several hubs that have closed down. I was also one of the co-founders of Impact Hub Joburg. We've also closed temporarily for now, but we don't know what's going to happen. So there is a lot of complexity there, and yet the ecosystem needs us more than ever. And so it's a particularly challenged time, I think, to be a social enterprise, and yet they're needed quite keenly. Just to give you a quick overview, this is actually from the impact investing work that I do, but it's worth seeing. These are some of the different players locally. So there's definitely funds available broadly for development as well as social enterprise. There's a lot of impact investors. There's a very, I think, robust social enterprise ecosystem, lots of well-known and even scaled and scalable social enterprises on the far right-hand side there. And underneath that are some of the guys that are sitting and supporting the ecosystem as a whole. So I don't want to really go too much into it because I know I'll run out of time, but just so you get a little snapshot of what this looks like. So into what we found with DICE. So, as Dan mentioned, there were several different countries that did this. For the South African study, I'll just speak to that one because that's the one that we were involved in. We did quite a nice survey and had a pretty good response rate. And I think what we found was perhaps not unsurprising overall, but certainly interesting, I think, and helpful for policymakers. So we found, first of all, that social enterprises and creative enterprises both are quite small. Oftentimes they have less than 500,000 Rand turnover. That's about, in the current market, unfortunately, given the Rand, is about 25,000 euros annual turnover. So that's quite low. But again, interestingly, not necessarily that much smaller than the general SME population in South Africa. So in line, perhaps, with the SMEs as a whole. In terms of sectors, you can see the red is the social and the gray is creative. We found actually quite a lot sector-wise in social enterprises or in business development. And this is just interesting to note because it relates to my point from earlier. This is because those are the guys that access that BEE funding, the enterprise development funding. And so they consider themselves social entrepreneurs, and they are, but that's a lot of where that also comes from. It's where the funding goes into. But there's a lot in education as well as music and performing arts. And you can see on creative side, of course, we defined partly by the sector they were in. So maybe, not as useful the data, but it's interesting to see that the majority were in the music performing, or the most were in music and performing arts. Perhaps more interestingly, in terms of SDGs that are focused on, we were quite interested by this. So a lot of the bigger amounts here were not surprising. So decent work, poverty reduction, quality education. Nobody was particularly surprised by those being key focus areas. But what's also interesting is that a lot of our respondents actually said, 51% said gender equality is something they very much look at. And I think that's quite interesting given, especially in South Africa, the high incidence of gender-based violence. So that's actually something that's a key thing that needs to be looked at. And it's interesting that therefore a lot of social and creative enterprises were focusing on that area. In terms of some of the elements that Dan had mentioned, we did find that there was a lot of inclusivity, a lot of women and youth in South African social and creative enterprises, a little bit higher in the social, but certainly not materially so. And we also found that a lot of the target beneficiaries and customers and clients oftentimes were also the youth. Again, not necessarily surprising given that South Africa has a huge youth unemployment program, which has now been only exacerbated. And it's something that really needs to be looked at as a matter of urgency, in which the government is looking at as a matter of urgency because it is potentially the most critical area that needs to be addressed at the current moment. In terms of some of the job creation factors, I will just put a caveat here. This was a relatively low sample number, but we did find that there was quite, the social enterprises tended to be larger job creators and creative enterprises in the South African ecosystem. And we also found the social enterprises potentially have a slightly higher resilience in economic downturns. Now, this was before, of course, the current crisis. So I don't know what the COVID will impact on this, and I guess we'll see. But at that time, it was interesting to note that. And I think it's worthwhile to kind of see how that compares with the SME sector as a whole. But in terms of numbers, it's quite comparable to the general SME sector. I know I think I only have another few minutes or so, maybe 1 or 2. So let me just quickly see here. Also important to note, in terms of what identified skills that social enterprises are needed, I just would like to pull one thing from this. Yes, technical skills are important, but actually softer skills like leadership and vision are very critical. And it's interesting that in the South African ecosystem, potentially even globally, but I can't speak to that with expertise, but certainly in South Africa, it's definitely an area that's not being considered as much. At the time, only Social Enterprise Academy was looking at it, and I think it's a very important and overlooked area in terms of overall success. Innovation was considered extremely important, and yet innovation activities didn't always correlate to successful financial outcomes. So that's something to consider. How do we support innovation in social and creative enterprises? And again, funding gaps were absolutely identified as well. There was a lack of early stage grant capital in particular. A lot of our guys were not grant dependent, and yet they stated that as one of the key barriers to their growth. Let me just close off here. Dan, is that okay? Do I have another minute or 2? Yeah, okay, cool. In terms of some of the constraints, network access and investment readiness were considered huge factors to accessing financing. So I think, again, that's also important. It's not just the technical skills and all those things and access to finance, it's also access to networks. But interestingly enough, overall, of all the challenges, even non-financial ones, obtaining grant funding and cash flow were listed as the main factors. So again, coming back to this early stage, just an interesting side point from my impact investing work. Everyone says they want to invest in innovation, but everyone's risk averse. I mean, I'm generalizing here, right? But there's always this thing, and it's like, oh no, we want to invest in innovation, but no, we can't bear that. And a lot of the work that I think I've done in my consulting work is education around that, saying, well, you can't have both. You know, and so I think we need more of this risk capital, play capital, venture philanthropy, really, that says if we're not going to get return on this. This is just for the startups, the really the early stage stuff that's going to fail, or that's going to be tested out and iterated, and I'm not going to make a return on it. Later stage, we can look at making returns. Yes, so I think maybe I can pause there. This was just summing up some of the stuff, but let me pause there because I can go through that in questions. If I'm not mistaken, that's my 10 minutes. Thanks so much.
Brilliant, thank you, Lana, perfect. And I think a lot of us in the UK, and I'm sure elsewhere, will recognise certainly the points about investing in innovation. And it was a good reminder for me to see the thing about job creation, where, you know, particularly in the UK, lots of people talk about creative industries as being such fantastic job creators. And, you know, maybe the only industries in the UK that we're hopeful about are things, you know, in the sort of new economy around, I don't know, video games and digital media and so on. But yet, you know, the evidence is showing us that social enterprises are just as good or even better at creating jobs. And I think we still feel that, but it's great to see some of that data from a country, you know, some way away, but with kind of similar patterns. Charmaine on the chat said I was a bit quiet, so that's another reason for me not to talk anymore. So I'm very, very happy to hand over to Mariam to give us a bit of perspective, maybe from Pakistan and maybe from Canada as well, where you have some experience and expertise. So yeah, thank you very much. And please, Mariam.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Like Lana, I'm kind of in between geographies and countries these days, but primarily my work has been in Pakistan over the last 10 years. It's interesting because that's how we ran into Dan. We were running this social enterprise survey for the British Council about 5 years ago. And the idea was to get a sense of the landscape in Pakistan, given that social enterprise as a term is fairly new. But it's not as new anymore, but it was back then. The practice of social enterprise, I'd say, had been around for decades, if not longer. And that's something you see in Canada too, that once you start talking about definitions, and there isn't really a global one, it gets interesting because in the Canadian ecosystem, you'll see about 80–90% of the social enterprises are actually nonprofits and registered legally as nonprofits. About 5% are cooperatives or others, and about 3% are for-profit. And this is according to their landscape study, I think in 2016. Come to Pakistan, and that's very different. The vast majority are registered as for-profits. Nonprofits have a lot of baggage in Pakistan, and but not just that, they also have a lot of red tape and bureaucracy around registration, around reporting, around structure, and primarily around funding also, right? So it's very hard to actually go to an impact investor, say I'm a nonprofit, and ask them to get money. So you'd see the stark opposite in Pakistan. I feel like that's somewhat our doing too, with our partners at the British Council and other places, where we've tried to really push for sustainable models, business models that are actually making money and pushing entrepreneurs to look beyond grant funding eventually and have self-sustaining business models. What's interesting is that this sector, so when we did the report back in 2015, 2016, and then we did a recent survey again with the Center of Asian Philanthropy. And it's really interesting to see how the sector has grown. Back in 2015-16, we were seeing about a fifth of social entrepreneurs or social enterprises run by women. And that number has gone on to about a third of social enterprises that are now run by women. So clearly, something's gone right. And I feel like partners like the British Council, partners like SEUK, who've worked with us in Pakistan around this, partners locally like SDPI and others, have really pushed for more gender inclusion, more access to mentorship, training opportunities, and even finance for women. So it's really, really heartening to see that shift happening. Another thing that has kind of always been the case, and I mean, Pakistan, 60% of our population is under the age of 30, over 60% actually, according to the latest Human Development Report by the UN. And so it's no surprise that the vast majority of the social enterprise sector is actually run by young people. What that means sometimes is that, the founders are less experienced. They have trouble around some of the more formal things, right? So they'd be very good at solving problems. They'd be excellent at, going down and digging deep and building relationships with the community. But sometimes that would mean that they're, kind of bad at maybe filing taxes on time, or that they have trouble, creating financial feasibilities and all of that, because that's something that's not as urgent to them. And so the more sort of nitty-gritties, the details of the running a business bit is sometimes where they lack. And that's where we've seen that good mentors and good incubation and acceleration programs have done a very good job at kind of helping these founders, of course, create excellent impact and further strengthen their relationships with the community, but also focus a little bit on the business side and ensure that they actually, once they're out of these programs and they go in front of an investor or a grant funder or someone else, that they actually have the structures and the formal sort of know-how to pitch something that these folks might be interested in. Because one of the resounding feedback we would often get from investors would be, they're just not ready. Yes, they're great. Yes, the work is great. We see they're passionate. Yes, it can work. But in terms of what we understand as investment readiness, they're not there yet. And so that's something I feel that over the last few years, there's been tremendous growth in that space too. We've seen, I mean, when we were talking in 2015, you'd see maybe 24, maybe not even, I'd say there were probably 16 or 17 incubators in the country. And right now we're seeing about 80, 90 incubators and accelerators in the country, about 45, 50 co-working spaces across the country. And so we've really seen the startup space in Pakistan bloom over the last 5 years. And along with that, we've also seen the social enterprise space bloom. And so it's interesting to see this entire growth. At the same time, some of the challenges that were there 5 years ago still exist now. They've just become different as time went by. So access to funding is still a challenge, right? The missing middle is still there. But what you're seeing is it's no longer about, oh, there's not enough money. Now it's about, well, there is money, but here's what's the problem with the money, right? Oh, this investor is asking me for too much equity. Oh, this investor doesn't understand the concept of social impact finance. Oh, this investor keeps comparing me to a regular tech company and I'm a social enterprise and I won't give an exit in 3 years. That's not going to happen, right? So the problems have become more nuanced, and that's actually really positive, right? This means that it's growing as a sector, that there's depth to these issues that we were facing 5 years ago, and then now you can have targeted interventions to address these challenges. And I see so many sort of overlaps with the things Lana was saying earlier around this, that even the impact investment space, right? Like we've seen investors now having to seriously consider impact investment, now having to seriously try and understand impact investment, which has also been interesting, seeing that some of your older social enterprises in Pakistan actually have raised Series A, Series B in the recent months, despite COVID. And so it's really, really interesting to see the challenges kind of shift. COVID has been a very interesting case study. And when I compare, so I'm going to come back to comparing Canada and Pakistan now. When we look at Canada, once again, we're looking at, primarily nonprofits. We're looking about 20% of Canadian social enterprises are actually, their purpose is to raise funds or generate funds for a parent company, which is sometimes a foundation, sometimes it's a different kind of company. And so you see a fifth of your sector is not mission focused at all. It's focused on raising money for another entity. The rest of the 80%, yes, there's a huge focus on social impact. There's a focus on job creation. There's a focus on employment creation, particularly for minority groups, low income groups, and marginalized populations, right? Which are very, very often racial and ethnic minorities. The contrast between rural and urban in Canada is very different too, right? You see most of your rural entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship in Canada around cooperatives, farmer models, agriculture models, small stakeholder farmer models. In Pakistan, you're seeing more of a focus on things like education and health, which are not government subjects, unlike Canada, right? So most of your startups in the social space in Pakistan are health and education. Yes, there is creative economies in both these countries, yet the core focus is around poverty reduction across these spaces. And creative industries come and help with that, but they don't formulate the primary goal at the end of the day. I was talking about the investment situation. And so in Canada, we're seeing that the majority of funding, at least in the beginning, comes from government grants, whether that's federal or provincial government grants or municipal grants. It's a very different funding landscape. And then as they, kind of grow forward, yes, you see private funders, you see family foundations, you see impact investors, but most of the funding for the sector is coming from the government. Pakistan, you're obviously seeing something very different. In Canada, especially given this sort of lean towards the nonprofit side, you're seeing much older social enterprise, right? The average age of a company, social enterprise company in Canada is 16 years, which is nothing close to Pakistan, right? So it's very interesting to see this sort of difference. COVID has impacted these two markets very differently. So in Canada, we're seeing a huge impact on small businesses. We're seeing a lot of small businesses going out of operation, especially on the creative industry side. The entertainment industry, the creative industry, they're extremely, hugely impacted. Like Lana said, a lot of co-working spaces are also really, really deeply impacted. So with constant lockdowns or lower level lockdowns here, centers like CSI, the Center for Social Innovation, which has multiple hubs across Ontario and also in New York, they've had to close down 2 spaces already. So it's been a huge impact. Look at Pakistan in contrast, and it's completely different. So I actually co-founded a series of co-working spaces in Pakistan. I exited last year, but they've actually grown another space during the pandemic. And that's interesting because we've seen that with a lot of offices closing, people have ended up flocking towards co-working spaces because they just can't get to work from home. Because Pakistani society, it's very different. People live in multi-generational households. Often, lots of people sharing things like internet, space. And so people finding it harder to work from home and then going to co-working spaces instead. Even in terms of numbers, right? So COVID numbers in Pakistan have been far less compared to its neighbors, compared to here in North America. The death rate has been far lower too. But beyond that, what we've seen in both countries is that COVID has led to social enterprises in some particular spaces, right? So for instance, in Canada, in the agriculture space, for Pakistan, in the telehealth space, and in the food insecurity space, social enterprises in these three sectors have actually gone on and joined the government in sort of distributing aid and support for low-income populations during COVID. And it's been fantastic to see, because suddenly you're seeing what real social enterprise procurement looks like for the first time, right? On a regional, on a national scale. And it goes to show you it's totally possible. Sure, the regulations, the mechanisms aren't there, but those things always tend to follow. What we needed was case studies, and those case studies have come about, thanks to COVID, as much as we don't like it. But there have been some positive externalities, this being a particularly promising one, that governments meet social enterprises, and government and social enterprises can work together. And when they do, the results, the impact is tremendous. So that's that. That's it from me. I think I'm a little over time.
No, it's fantastic, Marion. Thank you so much. And it's, again, great to see some similarities and also compare two countries and see the differences, and particularly the different sectors. Thank you so much. Vitek, it'd be fantastic to hear from you now. And please, but expertise around Europe and trends you're seeing and patterns you're seeing. And it's great to hear about the sort of different ecosystems in the way that maybe, government policy and supportive environments make a difference as well. But please, over to you.
Yes, I think I have my sound here. Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. And very interesting to hear before from Lana and Mariam. Absolutely some differences, but also several things that I definitely recognize in Europe and across Europe. So today I'm speaking a little bit from Euclid Network perspective. So since 2007, we are shaping an economy, a new economy that puts sustainable development for people and the environment at its core. And our focus is really on creating this European ecosystem for social enterprises. And it's also inclusive of building bridges between support organizations. We're a member-driven organization, and we have members such as National Alliances for Social Enterprise, incubators, social funds, universities, and also partners such as governments or the private sector. So we're mainly influencing European policy and funding for social entrepreneurs, and as well work to raise the visibility of the sector and its access to markets. And we have members currently across 21 countries, working across 40, and we're headquartered actually in The Hague in the Netherlands. I'm also Dutch, so I might refer a little bit to some Dutch examples as well. So our members are really located from Turkey to Ireland or Estonia, Portugal to Russia, and everything in between. And at the global level, actually, we also have capacity building programs for social entrepreneurs in Russia, Middle East, and North Africa. And I think specifically for those who are on the call today in the creative and cultural industry, we have an Erasmus for Young Entrepreneur program. It's already running for over 4 years. So we support through the European Commission entrepreneurs in the creative and cultural industries to actually go on exchange to each other. Currently, of course, also more virtual exchange, but really to learn from each other. And that program is funded through the European Commission. So I think after the session that we have today, Dan and Chris from Social Enterprise UK said that I could share some of these materials with you if you're interested to look at these exchanges, for example. There will be some information there. So EN is like a partner to the European Commission. Also some points I will be making about them, therefore, in this session. And we as well work with the United Nations on the social and solidarity economy. So if you look at Europe, I think in most European countries in recent years, social enterprises have increased progressively in size and relevance. And this is very interesting as well to see we have some very old social enterprises, so maybe more the Canadian environment, but also you really see this high increase in specific countries of social entrepreneurs in Europe, and also an attraction of significant interest from diverse stakeholders, which is definitely more than it was there before. And this is including an increasing number of entrepreneurs who themselves want to start an enterprise that makes a positive impact for people and planet, but also, of course, all these support organizations or research around it, policymakers and financial intermediaries. So if we look at the exact number of social enterprises in Europe, they're currently only known by estimation, and mainly that's due to a lacking legal framework across most of the European countries. And if you look at the wider kind of group of what they call here social economy enterprises, and this is including social enterprise, but also cooperatives and mutuals, this was estimated in 2017 by the European Commission to be 2.8 million organizations, employing some 19.1 million people and accounting for 6.3% of the total paid workforce in Europe. And of course, that sector also has a lot of volunteers. So quite an interesting number. And at the moment, Euclid Network and 20 plus national enterprises, national alliance enterprises and research institutions, such as well your own organization, Dan, Social Enterprise UK, we're currently performing a large survey research across 8 European countries to identify a little bit the status quo, the barriers and enables for successful growth of social enterprises in Europe. And what we see in most countries there is that the largest growth has been in recent years. So the organizations that have been found in recent years, the numbers are just expanding enormously. So also here, like for the entrepreneurs here participating in the seminar, after the seminar, we'll share a link with you. You can still participate in this research and actually have your voice be heard. And we will share this research with the European Commission to actually develop future policies and funding programs based on your needs as a social entrepreneur. So if you look at European level, the European Commission has become an increasingly strong supporter of social enterprises as part of their policymaking, funding and social economy action plans in recent years. So earlier this year, actually, Commissioner Breton recognized the social and proximity economy as one of the 14 key industrial ecosystems in Europe for the recovery of Europe. So the 14 kind of ecosystem where the social entrepreneurs are in is a new one, which is very exciting because this means that absolutely the European Commission will take our organizations and social entrepreneurs into consideration. And specifically as well, the creative and cultural industry is another one that's recognized as really crucial to for the recovery of Europe after the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you look at the European Commission as well, we're working with them in the European Parliament to develop what they call the new European Action Plan for the social economy. And this will be launched in 2021 for the next 5 years. So we're at a crucial stage as social entrepreneurs and as organizations all to actually influence this plan and what is going to happen in this part of an important area for us as social entrepreneurs. So I would definitely, for everyone attending the session today, for you to consider joining the monthly roadmap events of the European Commission and their final event. The next monthly roadmap event is 26-27 November. My colleague Veerle Klein will be speaking about Build Back Better, the role of social enterprises in an inclusive and sustainable economic recovery in Europe. And the final event, the European Social Economy Summit, will take place in Mannheim, hopefully in person, but otherwise virtual on 26 and 27 May of 2020. So this is really something that's quite nice. There will be monthly events every month, and I think there's one on circular economy in March. There's one on education in January, and social entrepreneurs will speak there, policymakers, investors. So it's quite nice. So if we look a little bit at the key issues that social enterprises are working on or facing in Europe, I really recognize a lot of things that Lana and Mariam are saying. So if we look at Europe, social enterprises are still less visible and recognized than traditional enterprises. There is a difficulty to access markets, and as well the access to finance is something that can be definitely improved. So if we look at the visibility or the recognition, many stakeholders across Europe still struggle to understand the nature of social enterprise. There is also here no clear definition and across all the countries. Every country has its own definition or no definition. And also there's a big difference in regulatory and legal frameworks. There's a very interesting European Commission study that actually showcases per country what the frameworks are, and also how many social entrepreneurs there are estimated per country. So I'll share that as well after this session. And you can as well see that the difference in fiscal policy and infrastructures are just not in place or differ. It can be a huge problem, as we recently saw when support packages were created, financial support packages to support entrepreneurs through the pandemic, because the way these packages were structured often excluded social enterprises. And many social entrepreneurs were actually the ones supporting the most affected by the pandemic. So this is really kind of a weaving error. I don't know if you can say that in English, or a mistake in the system. And we're working with the European Commission, of course, and many governments, and with our members who are the national alliances for social enterprise in the countries, to address this, because this is really tough, and it's only difficult to address these kind of structural errors. Well, there's already a crisis going on at the same time, and our governments need to make fast decisions and implementation on these support packages. But we're definitely working hard on making sure that this is addressed, and it's addressed fast. So for the access to markets, you see there is actually these days a demand for products and services offered by social entrepreneurs. The demand for those products is not necessarily the issue anymore by the general public, the public and private sector as well. But the market is not really well aligned yet. So buyers and sellers do not yet well know how to find each other. They do not always understand each other's business models and priorities yet. And here as well, I know that Social Enterprise UK is also very working hard to work around Buy Social. So to increase the ease of social entrepreneurs to access these new markets and buyers, and to find social enterprise sellers through campaigns, but also creating and providing training for social entrepreneurs and corporate sector employees alike to ease actually working together, because there's a huge potential here. And I really hope that in next years, this is something that Social Enterprise UK, but also UK Network or the European Commission, we can really move into the same direction and achieve that important aspect, which is currently still an obstacle. We're also doing some research with, for example, the EU Vienna or Social Impact Awards to actually investigate the obstacles and enablers of doing business internationally for social entrepreneurs in Europe. And this will lead to policy recommendations as well, to make that kind of a better path. If a social entrepreneur wants to internationalize, that it's possible. And of course, this access to finance, I think Lana has explained it already very well. Yes, still a lot of investors, they're moving in towards impact investing. And there's definitely a fantastic increase, but we still see business school students joining investment firms. And they're too often still trained on outdated investment theories and models, or the new models have not definitely been developed that well yet. So impact measurement frameworks and the whole understanding of how to measure impact, or the collection of environmental, social, and governance data, and the reporting is unfortunately still in the developmental and not fully mature state. So in Europe, we're definitely gonna focus on that, as well as UK Network, and also the European Commission has a focus on it. So policy accounting frameworks have not been well developed yet. That there's actually really a financial consequence of negative externalities. And if you really see that I started working on impact measurement in 2006 at the United Nations, and mainstreaming ESG data into financial markets, Thomson Reuters, in 2010. And I really had hoped it would develop faster into mainstream business education and financial markets, but apparently in some way it really needs quite some time. Though in recent years, I really see a sudden large increase, and this pandemic actually seems to have brought this kind of mindset and shift and understanding. So things are really speeding up. So that makes me quite hopeful to see some of these unfunctional systems and really the human mindset actually changing and becoming more flexible, and really putting a lot of emphasis on innovating in this area. Harvard is actually also doing a very interesting study at the moment to explore how to innovate, change, and update accounting system and frameworks to a system that's working for people and planet. And that is actually something that UK Network is a great fan of. So happy to share that as well with you. So I'm just checking how far I'm in on time. I could talk about this for ages. So I could talk maybe a little bit more about the key issues they're working on the SDGs, or maybe otherwise we can go to questions as well then.
Thank you, Viteke. Let's just check if other people have questions, because it'd be fantastic to hear more. And I've got questions as well. But if there were other, I wanted to make sure that if people did have questions attending, then that we could turn to them first of all. I know Samantha had one about model business plan, and Samantha, Chris or I will follow up with links to resources that we or the likes of other networks and partners will have. So I can make sure that gets sent to you. But if other people have questions relating to the kind of different environments in different countries, we can come to them now, or I can pick on Shahan or Daniel or people I know well in the participants and invite them to make a question. But yeah, otherwise, Viteke, it'd be great just to hear maybe a little bit more about the sort of, it's not a question, but everyone's touched a bit on, some growth, and we've seen the growth, in the UK. Even if recognition comes and goes and policy comes and goes, we still see this growth among actual social enterprises themselves, which is so encouraging. And I sort of have a question about, is that just because of people's sheer energy and enthusiasm across our countries? Or what is the role of both kind of independent ecosystem and supporting actors, and what is the role of government and policy, and the relationship between those three things? Can it happen, or does it happen anyway? And how much the supporting ecosystem makes a difference, and how much, but please, Viteke, keep going a little bit more, and then maybe we'll go back to Lana and Mariam to maybe answer my kind of query.
Yes, I mean, that's a fantastic question on if actually why this growth is there suddenly. And I think that you already saw the growth after the financial crisis in 2008. Quite some growth in social entrepreneurs, at least in Europe. And if you look at the interdependency between what's influencing what, I think it all helps. If you look at the developments, for example, in the Netherlands, so if you look at the social entrepreneurship path there, we have had 10 years ago, approximately, that Social Enterprise UK has been founded. So a similar organization, or Social Enterprise NL, sorry, so a similar organization like Social Enterprise UK. And you really see with that foundation and the work that they're doing, there is a lot of additional visibility, recognition. They work with the government. We currently, actually recently, they have achieved that there will be a new legal entity, which is called the BV Maatschappij, the BVM, which is something like it's a social enterprise kind of legal entity. And they will be working with the government actually to form that and engage all the different parties. So you definitely see that an ecosystem or an organization like Social Enterprise UK or Social Enterprise NL can be highly influential nationally. If you look at the European Commission, European Commissioner Nicolas Schmit, he is now actually the Commissioner for Jobs, for Social Rights, and he has already been supporting the social economy, well, whereas I know already since 2005 when he was still a minister in Luxembourg, but now he's in that position and he's asked really by the President of the European Commission to create this action plan for the social economy. And they're engaging all different actors. They're engaging social entrepreneurs in strategic dialogue, like sessions. They're engaging the different support organizations, impact investors, intermediaries, organizations like ourselves, Youth Network. So he's really charged to create an action plan. And you see that all these different aspects come together. And then, of course, the public. If you look at the public, currently, like, there's a changing discourse on doing business. It's not just like Youth Network or Social Enterprise UK or Social Enterprise NL, but children are marching the streets, demanding really climate action. They do not longer accept polluting companies. And Generation Z is really entering the labor force. And they want to make a meaningful contribution to a better world. And a job is no longer just a job. They want a job with a purpose. So they're not going to work for certain multinationals that in the past were absolutely something that they would have loved to work with when you look at generations past. Growing awareness amongst consumers about missteps in value change, no longer wanting to buy certain clothes where there's child labor involved, or even the Financial Times actually is running a campaign on capitalism. So time for a reset. So you really see all these different aspects working together. I don't know how you see that in the UK.
Yeah, No, I totally agree. I think that's right. I'm just conscious we've got 6 minutes or so left. So Lana and then Mariam, if you could either say a little bit about the ecosystem or respond to Shahan had a question about social enterprises responding to the pandemic and sort of maybe agile, flexible responses. And then Daniel was asking about whether social enterprise is seen as a beacon of ethical business or is it sort of just part of the mix? So yeah, please quickly, Lana and then Mariam.
Sure. So, I mean, I think, I'm just agreeing with a lot of what Tigger was also saying now as well. I mean, really, there is a philosophical shift that's happening. And I think people are realizing that exactly that there's this interconnectedness that's happening in the world. And we need to, it's not enough to just be, actually, Mariana Mazzucato is I follow all her stuff and she's based in the UK. She really talks a lot about value and how we need to understand value differently and how capitalism, pure in its purest form, has actually led us to this kind of warped idea of what value is, which isn't necessarily actually producing anything anymore. And I think that that's tied into it. That's one aspect. Two, I would also say that I think a lot of people, when social enterprise first came out, was like, okay, fine, it's a bit more sustainable way to do a nonprofit thing, right? But what we've seen in the time since it first came around is that actually social enterprises can be just as profitable, if not more profitable than regular business, whatever that may be. And I think that a lot of that is because if you're going out and, it's like connectedness to your market. If you're talking to your customers, if you're finding out about their needs and how to help your community and your staff, that's just good business. It doesn't have to be, social. And so I think linked in maybe to Daniel's question around, like different ethical, responsible business practices. I think just to say that I do see that there is this kind of separation. There is a social enterprise model in terms of trying to achieve a certain mission or goal or outcome and do that in a financially sustainable way versus how you as a company, whether you're social or not in your primary purpose, how socially and environmentally responsible you are. And that's like the B Corp kind of model and those kinds of things. I do think that they're separate, but they are interrelated. And so I think it's actually there has been an increase, in my opinion, in looking at both. And maybe just to then close off with Samantha's question as well, which was asking about models for social enterprises. It's a very difficult one to answer because it's such a broad thing. And one of the things, and Dan knows, we've talked about this a lot, it's not a sector, and people forget that. Social enterprise is not a sector. So you can have an industrial, factory that's a social enterprise, right? And you can have a service-based business. And, if you go to business school, you'll understand that those things, you don't need to go to business school. You can, read a model online. You'll understand that those things are very, very different in how they, in their marginal profits and costs and how they structure themselves, the scale that they need. And so in the same way, there's not one business model that works. And I think it's more around having those common sets of practices and common definitions around what it means than necessarily a business model that'll be effective. And likewise, I think some are much more profitable inherently than others. Some social enterprises will probably always need a bit of a boost and maybe even be mostly grant reliant actually, or they, and some things are the purview of the nonprofit sector entirely. And that won't go away, like aid, emergency aid and things like that. You can't really financialize that. I think that's my opinion. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mariam, please.
Well, Lana, they can financialize anything.
You're probably right.
The beauty of hyper capital. No, I feel like I'm hearing you guys and I'm like, yes, because there's absolutely a philosophical shift. And, there's lots of reasons for it. These global climate catastrophes we've been seeing over the last few years, it's really shaking people up. Both, at the community level, people already had a sense of these things, right? And especially in places like Canada and Pakistan, where you have significant indigenous populations, this is part of their truth. They have been warning us about this for centuries now, that if we continue down this path, we will see the demise of our species. And that's exactly what the UN is saying now. That's exactly what scientists are saying now. And so there's what these indigenous communities have been telling us for decades now. Science is, coming and saying, hey, yeah, those guys are right. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. And so we're seeing now more and more from a policy lens and from a top-down lens, a real push towards seeing the SDGs actually survive and succeed, which we didn't see with the MDGs at all. And so now everybody is shuffling. It's 2021 soon. Everybody's shuffling like, oh my God, where are we on the SDGs? Are we tracking them? Are we mapping them? Are we doing this? And so we're seeing that because of this scramble, more and more socially focused, social impact, social purpose first, purpose-driven companies are getting recognized and are getting supported and financed and, partnered with. I feel like the pandemic once again around, and I feel like one of you asked this question around how the pandemic's impacted this, is that they're seeing, procurement on the federal, provincial, public level is now happening through a lot of these enterprises, particularly around in countries like Pakistan, particularly around telemedicine, particularly around aid distribution, food distribution, income distribution. We're also seeing around this whole idea of, and I think Vitika kind of, talked about this work with purpose, but also around the changing nature of work, right? With growing mechanization, with AI taking up a lot of our jobs as we know it right now, but over the next 10 years, they're saying, 40% of jobs as they exist won't really exist anymore. And so the future of work is also kind of getting in the way and really making us think about, okay, so where do we see ourselves? Right? Should there be a universal basic income? What should that look like? What are, with capitalism telling us constantly that we are only of value when we are doing something and working, and in a 9-to-5 kind of, rat race, suddenly you're talking about universal basic income. What the hell, right? So it's really shaking people up. And they're having to think about alternate conceptions, alternate ways of doing things. And thankfully, social entrepreneurs exist, and they've been doing amazing work around this for ages. And now suddenly, people are realizing, yeah, there's value here. So yeah, I mean, I think that growth is kind of, it's finally here, thank God. About time. That's my reaction. And it totally makes sense in the context. But around the more sort of the ethical, sort of Daniel's question, right? Okay, are these entities, or are these, folks considered the beacons of ethics? And it's tricky, right? Because we expect this from them. And this is actually one of the challenges, right? That instead of looking at social enterprises as a whole, or like, multiple actors in a sector, we're looking at these hero social entrepreneurs that almost have this, cult following, because they're like, oh my God, this guy is so cool, or this woman is so amazing, and and but that's not the case, right? It's I think one of you mentioned the importance of participatory approaches, right? That none of this happens in a vacuum. This work is, sure, we may feel like we're going and saving someone, but we need to really get off our high horses and our leave behind our savior complexes. It's these communities that, when they enable us to do this work, are actually saving us as humanity. And if we are living up to their standards, that's when we actually are, sort of progressing or moving in the direction of becoming beacons of ethics. And I feel like that's something very aspirational right now. I feel like we're not there. I feel like we keep ascribing it to the wrong sort of individuals or actors or segments. And I feel like we need to do a better job of understanding the importance of indigenous and traditional narratives. And I feel like social enterprise actually is the vehicle that can allow for that to happen. And so I'm really hopeful that that's going to happen now, even more so than it. I mean, we're seeing that, right? So there's a lot of focus now on regenerative development. There's a lot of focus on regenerative design, which goes beyond sustainability, right? Which goes beyond this, oh, let's sustain, let's do green. No, that's, come on. If we kept doing green, we're not going to survive. We have to look at approaches that restore, and beyond restore, that regenerate. Oh, geez, we're over time. I'm so sorry, guys. I end up going on a speak. But thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. And you're getting loads of agreement in the comments. So no, I thank you so much, and it's brilliant to hear that. Thank you so much all for being here today, and thank you to all the attendees as well, and for being part of this. And, you know, SUK will keep on serving its members as best we can, because that's our job, but also, you know, remembering to look beyond, you know, our borders and look across the world and work with others. And we learn so much from you know, our international work as well. And it's such a pleasure to see you guys always and work with you. So thank you. And we can follow up with, you know, people that have questions amongst those that attended, and send resources. And Viteca, we can share your material with people. So yeah, happy Social Enterprise Day, and fantastic that you were here with us today. So thanks all.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
See you
Bye.
soon.